Put your hands behind your back right now, because I don't care who you think you are. You don't belong here. And if you resist, I'll drag you across this pool deck in front of your wife, your children, and every single person watching." That was the voice of the police officer, sharp, cold, filled with authority misused, words that cut through the Miami air like a siren. The guests at Ocean Breeze Resort froze, phones lifted, and a quiet horror fell over the scene. What began as a family vacation was already turning into a public humiliation. This is where our story begins. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and tap like if you believe no family should ever face this kind of treatment. Now let me take you back to how this nightmare started for Michael Harris, his wife Vanessa, and their 2 children. Michael was 45 years old, a seasoned FBI agent with 2 decades of service, a man who had arrested drug lords, dismantled terror cells, and carried the quiet weight of scars that only those in law enforcement ever know. But at the resort that week, none of his history, none of his loyalty, none of his sacrifices mattered to the eyes that judged him. He was only a black man at a luxury property, someone who did not fit the image they expected. His wife, Vanessa, 42, had built her name as a civil rights lawyer in Chicago. She had fought for people who had been profiled, harassed, and treated unjustly, recently winning a case that forced a police department to pay $120 million for systemic discrimination. Yet here she was, trying to rest her voice, putting aside her courtroom fire, hoping for a quiet week to read her books and watch her children laugh. Their son, Jordan, just 13, carried the hopeful energy of adolescence, already tall, already dreaming of basketball courts and scholarships. Their daughter, Ava, only 8, adored the sea, chasing little shells and smiling with the innocent belief that her parents could protect her from anything. That morning at the pool was supposed to be a picture of peace. Jordan challenged Ava to swim laps, her small arms splashing wildly, his long strokes showing off. Michael leaned back in his chair, sunglasses shading tired eyes, finally letting his body sink into rest. Vanessa sat with a novel, but every few pages she looked up to catch the joy of her family. For once, they were not the FBI agent and the civil rights attorney. They were simply mom and dad, together with their kids. But then came the intrusion. A shadow loomed over their chairs. A man in a black polo shirt, tall, stern, the kind of presence meant to intimidate. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice tight, clipped, suspicious. "I need to confirm you're a guest here." Michael lowered his sunglasses slowly, met his eyes, and spoke calmly. "We're in room 305. Checked in yesterday." The guard's lips twitched, not into a real smile, but into a smirk. "Just procedure," he said, though his tone was anything but routine. "I'll need to call the front desk." Vanessa's book closed with a quiet thud. She didn't need Michael's training to know what this was. She had lived it, fought it, argued it in courtrooms across the country. She glanced at her husband, their eyes speaking what they both already knew. This was not about procedure. Michael gave a tiny nod, urging calm. He did not want to turn his family's vacation into a battleground, but inside. A familiar heaviness pressed against his chest. He had seen this play out too many times, both in his own life and in the stories of his colleagues. The guard walked away, phone in hand. Jordan, confused, asked softly, "Dad, what's going on?" Michael forced a smile. "Nothing. Son, just a misunderstanding." But it wasn't nothing. Minutes later, the guard returned, not alone this time. Another man walked beside him, younger, cockier, eyes sharp with challenge. The first guard's voice was more forceful now. "You need to leave the pool area until your information is verified." Michael's jaw tightened. "I've given you my room number. Call the desk." There's no reason to ask my family to leave. Vanessa rose, standing shoulder to shoulder with her husband, her voice cut through the air like a lawyer delivering a closing argument. We've answered your questions. What's the real reason you're still pressing us? The younger guard crossed his arms, smirked, and shrugged. We've had people sneak in. Don't think it's about you. The words were casual, but the insult was sharp. Don't think it's about you. Vanessa's eyes flashed. Really? Because it looks exactly like it's about us. Jordan and Ava had stopped playing now. Jordan's brows furrowed. A boy on the edge of understanding something cruel about the world. Ava swam to the edge, clinging to the wall, watching her mother's face. Michael touched Vanessa's arm gently, trying to steady the storm inside her. Let them check, he said softly, but his own voice carried a weight, a fatigue, the ache of knowing this story too well. Guests around the pool had noticed. Phones were raised, whispers traveled, and in that moment, the air shifted. This was no longer just a quiet challenge between a family and two guards. This was becoming a spectacle, one that could spin out of control. And Michael Harris, who had faced armed suspects and international threats, felt the sting of powerlessness, because what threatened him now was not danger in the field, but prejudice at home. He looked at his children, at the worry in Jordan's eyes, at the confusion on Ava's little face, and he knew. This was only the beginning. Step away from the pool chairs and move to the side. Now! The command came harshly, not from a security guard this time, but from a uniformed police officer who had just entered the resort grounds with his partner. Guests gasped, phones lifted higher, and the once relaxed atmosphere was shattered in an instant. Michael Harris rose slowly from his chair, his tall frame steady, his voice calm but edged with steel. Officer, my family and I are registered guests. We are in room 305, if you need to confirm. Call the front desk. There is no reason to remove us. The younger officer, Brian O'Connor, sneered, his hand resting dangerously close to the cuffs on his belt. Save it. We've had reports of intruders in this area, and you don't look like you belong. The words struck like a blow, naked in their prejudice, shameless under the eyes of strangers recording every second. Vanessa's heart hammered, but she stepped forward, voice firm, sharp, the voice that had dismantled hostile witnesses in courtrooms across Chicago. You've already been told our room number. You have no grounds to escalate this further. My husband has cooperated fully. O'Connor's lip curled, dismissive. Ma'am, if you don't back up, you'll be detained too. Michael extended his arm slightly, shielding his wife with a protective gesture that had become instinct after years of facing down threats. He looked at his children. Jordan stood stiff, fists clenched, anger and confusion tearing at his young face. Ava clung to the side of the pool, trembling, her small voice breaking through the chaos. Daddy, are they going to take you away? That question pierced Michael's chest deeper than any wound he had ever suffered. He forced a calm smile for her sake. No, sweetheart. Everything will be fine. But inside, fire burned. The older officer, Sergeant David Miller, finally spoke, his voice less aggressive but no less firm. Sir, hand over your identification. All of it. We'll sort this out after. Michael reached for his wallet with deliberate slowness, every movement calculated, his FBI training reminding him that sudden actions could be twisted in an instant. He pulled out his badge and ID, the very symbols of 2 decades of service, and held them up. Special Agent Michael Harris, Federal Bureau of Investigation, this is my identification. The crowd stirred, whispers rising, a few voices could be heard. He's FBI? Did he just say that? Phones zoomed in, capturing the badge glinting under the Florida sun, but O'Connor didn't flinch. He stepped forward, snatched the ID, glanced at it with disdain, then tossed it back toward Michael's chest. Nice souvenir. They sell those online. Vanessa's breath caught in fury, her fists clenched at her side. How dare you? She began, but Michael's hand pressed gently against hers, holding her back. His eyes never left O'Connor's. His voice, low but filled with warning, rumbled like thunder before a storm. Officer, you are making a grave mistake. O'Connor smirked, unmoved. We'll see about that. Turn around, hands behind your back. The command sliced through the air. The crowd erupted, gasps, murmurs, shouts. Are you kidding me? One guest exclaimed. Another shouted, He showed you ID! Jordan's voice rose above them all, raw and broken. He's my dad! He works for the government! You can't do this! His words echoed across the pool deck, captured by dozens of phones now live streaming. The hashtag that would later dominate social media, #JusticeForHarris, was being born at that very moment. Michael felt every eye on him, his daughter's tears, his son's anger, his wife's fury, the stranger's judgment, the officer's contempt. He had faced cartel assassins, bomb threats, and armed standoffs, but never had he felt the sting of powerlessness like this. He thought of his training. Comply. Survive. Protect those you love. Slowly. He turned, placed his hands behind his back, and let the cold steel clamp down on his wrists. The sound of the cuffs locking echoed like a gunshot, silencing the crowd for a heartbeat before outrage exploded again. Vanessa surged forward, her voice ringing like a bell of defiance. That is enough. You are arresting a federal agent without cause, in front of his wife and children, at a hotel where he is a paying guest. You are violating every law you swore to uphold. O'Connor's jaw tightened. Step back, or you're next. Miller shifted uneasily, his eyes darting to the growing crowd, the recording phones, the whispers turning into shouts. He knew this was spiraling, but he hesitated, unwilling to check his partner. Vanessa did not step back. She stepped closer, her finger pointing directly at O'Connor. You will regret this, not just today, not just tomorrow. You will answer in court, in public, and before every eye that sees what you are doing here. O'Connor laughed, but the sound was hollow, forced, around them. The crowd pressed closer, muttering, shaking heads, recording every second. Some shouted, Uncuff him! Others yelled, That's abuse! A tourist with a large camera shouted, This is going online right now! And it did. Within minutes. The first clips were already hitting social media, spreading faster than wildfire. Michael stood cuffed, his back straight, his face calm, but inside his mind raced. He remembered cases he had investigated, the mothers who wept over sons killed in wrongful police shootings, the fathers who told him of humiliation that broke their spirit, the young boys like his own son who grew up learning fear instead of freedom. And now, here he was, wearing those very chains of suspicion. He turned his head slightly, enough to catch Jordan's eyes. It's okay, son, he said softly, though the words tasted like ash. Jordan shook his head, eyes wet, fists clenched. No, Dad, it's not okay. It's never okay. The boy's voice cracked, his anger too big for his young frame. Ava's sobs grew louder, muffled against Vanessa's side as her mother wrapped an arm around her. Vanessa's other hand still pointed at O'Connor, her voice steady, controlled, but burning with fire. You just handcuffed a federal agent without probable cause. Do you understand what that means? Do you even realize who you've put those cuffs on? The crowd was no longer silent. They were with her. The line between private humiliation and public scandal had been crossed. And though Michael's wrists ached, though his dignity was bruised, he knew something else now. This would not end here. This would not be swept away with an apology or a refund. This was bigger than one family. This was a fight for justice that had just begun. Uncuff him right now, before you destroy your own careers. A voice shouted from the crowd. This time not from a stranger, but from another guest who had stepped forward with his phone raised high. Broadcasting live. Dozens of people had gathered now around the pool, their eyes wide, their voices loud, their phones catching every angle of the humiliation. Michael Harris stood tall despite the cold steel biting into his wrists, his calm presence a striking contrast to the fury boiling around him. Vanessa, her face glowing with righteous anger, gripped Ava tightly with one arm while pointing at the officers with the other, her words slicing the air like blades. You've crossed the line, officers, and it will cost you more than you realize. You are harassing a family, traumatizing 2 children, and arresting a man who has given 20 years of his life to protect this country. O'Connor smirked, the arrogance of a man who thought a badge gave him invincibility. Lady, I don't care what fairy tale you spin. This man refused to comply when ordered, and that's all we need. Vanessa's laugh was sharp, bitter, cutting. Refused to comply? He gave you his room number. He gave you his FBI identification. He gave you more respect than you deserve, and you threw his badge back in his face. Do you think people can't see what this is? Her voice grew louder, turning toward the crowd. Do you think we don't all see it? Guests shouted back in agreement, their anger joining hers. It's racist, one woman cried. He showed his ID, another man yelled. A teenager live streaming added. This is going viral right now. Millions are going to see it. Michael shifted slightly, his voice calm but firm, the kind of steady voice trained in hostage negotiations. Sergeant Miller, look at the situation. You know this is wrong. You know I have done nothing illegal. Call your supervisor before this spirals further. Miller's face tightened, his eyes flickering between his partner, the furious crowd, and the man standing before him with quiet authority. But he hesitated, his fear of undermining his fellow officer stronger than his courage to stop a mistake. O'Connor barked, Don't talk to my partner. Talk to me. You're under investigation for trespassing, and until proven otherwise, you're a suspect. The words were so absurd, so baseless, that the crowd broke into angry laughter, their disbelief fueling their outrage. Jordan, trembling with fury, stepped forward, his young voice cracking but loud enough to pierce the noise. He's my dad. He's an FBI agent. He works for this country, for all of you. How can you treat him like this? His outburst caught even O'Connor off guard for a second, the raw innocence and pain in the boy's tone pulling at the onlookers' hearts. Michael's chest tightened, hearing the cry of his son, the boy he had tried to protect from the harsh realities of the world for as long as he could. He turned slightly, his eyes finding Jordan's, his voice quiet but clear. It's okay, son. Remember what I told you? We stand tall, even when others try to push us down. Vanessa gripped Jordan's shoulder, her eyes never leaving O'Connor. You just handcuffed a federal agent in front of his children, she repeated, her voice like thunder rolling across a stormy sky. Do you understand the gravity of that? Do you know the lawsuits, the investigations, the national scandal you just created with your arrogance? O'Connor opened his mouth to respond, but his words were drowned out by the growing roar of the crowd. Guests were no longer whispering. They were shouting openly now, demanding the cuffs be removed, demanding justice. Phones streamed live to Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all at once, and the comments were pouring in by the thousands. This is outrageous. I'm watching from New York. Release him now. Hashtag justice for Harris. The poolside had turned into a courtroom. The public, the jury, the evidence undeniable. Michael knew the power of silence, of composure. He stood without struggling, his back straight, his face resolute, the badge of his profession invisible now but imprinted in every line of his bearing. He looked directly at Miller again. You know my face. You've seen my name come across your desk before. I was the lead investigator in the Miami terror cell takedown 5 years ago. The reason this city never saw an explosion in its financial district was because of my team. And now your partner has me in cuffs because he doesn't like how I look in a bathing suit at a resort where I paid full price." Miller's eyes widened, recognition flickering, shame creeping in. But still he hesitated. Vanessa seized the moment, her voice sharp. "He's telling the truth, and you know it. You're standing beside a man who saved your city, and you're letting your partner treat him like a criminal. Do you realize how insane that looks right now?" The crowd erupted with applause, voices chanting, "Uncuff him! Uncuff him!" O'Connor's face reddened, veins visible at his temples. "I don't care what his story is. He's under arrest until I say otherwise." Vanessa stepped closer, her voice lower now, lethal in its calmness. "Then prepare yourself, Officer O'Connor, because every lawyer in this state will line up behind me. Every camera here is capturing your abuse, and every citizen watching will know your name." O'Connor's bravado wavered for the first time, his eyes darting to the phones, to the faces of witnesses, to the sergeant shifting uneasily at his side. Michael spoke again, his tone carrying the weight of authority. "You still have a chance to correct this. Remove the cuffs, apologize to my wife and children, or you will not only lose your badge, you will face charges for false arrest of a federal officer." The silence that followed was thick, charged, almost unbearable. The sound of Ava's quiet sobs broke through, fragile, heartbreaking. The little girl clung to her mother, her small voice trembling. "Mommy, please make them stop." Vanessa bent down, kissed the top of her daughter's head, then rose again, fire blazing in her eyes. "You hear that?" she asked coldly. "That's a child begging for mercy because of what you're doing, and you will never erase that sound from your conscience." Phones caught every word. Streams lit up with comments. "I'm crying watching this. This family deserves better. This is history in the making." Sergeant Miller finally exhaled, the weight of the moment crushing him. He turned to O'Connor, his voice hoarse but firm. "Brian, enough. Take the cuffs off." O'Connor snapped his head toward him, shock flashing. "What? No, he—" "Enough," Miller repeated, louder this time, his hand on his partner's arm. "You're done here." The crowd roared, voices rising like a wave. O'Connor's hands trembled as he pulled out the key, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. The metallic click of the cuffs opening was met with cheers, applause, and shouts of justice. Michael rubbed his wrists slowly, his face calm, but his eyes dark with a quiet storm. He turned, looking at his children, offering them a reassuring nod, but inside, he made a vow. This was no longer about a family vacation gone wrong. This was about a fight that would echo far beyond the walls of Ocean Breeze Resort. This was about every person who had ever been humiliated, every child who had ever watched their parent treated as less than human. And Michael Harris, FBI agent, husband, father, would not let this story end in silence. "Who authorized this circus?" The words boomed across the pool deck as a new figure pushed through the gathering crowd, his uniform pressed, his badge gleaming, his posture carrying the authority of rank. Deputy Chief Robert Hayes of the Miami-Dade Police Department had arrived, flanked by 2 senior officers who looked far less certain than their commander. The crowd parted slightly, phones lifted higher, murmurs spreading as guests realized someone higher was finally stepping in. O'Connor stiffened, his jaw tight, his pride still stinging from being forced to release Michael moments earlier. Sergeant Miller lowered his gaze, relief and shame mingling in his expression. Michael Harris stood free now, rubbing his wrists where red marks still showed, his face calm but his eyes unflinching as he locked them on the new arrival. Vanessa stepped forward before anyone else could speak, her voice carrying with the force of a practiced litigator addressing a jury. "Deputy Chief Hayes, your officers just placed handcuffs on a federal agent in front of his wife and children without probable cause. without respect, and without reason other than bias and arrogance. My husband identified himself, gave them his FBI credentials, his driver's license, and his room number. They mocked him, humiliated him, and traumatized my children. Do you understand the scale of what just happened under your department's name? The crowd erupted in support, clapping, shouting, chanting words like justice and accountability. Hayes raised his hand, trying to quiet the noise, but the chants would not die. He turned back to Vanessa and Michael, his voice steady but clearly weighted by the gravity of the moment. Ma'am, sir, I assure you, this will be investigated thoroughly, and if misconduct occurred, it will be addressed. Vanessa's laugh rang sharp, bitter, slicing through his polished tone. If misconduct occurred, you have video evidence from 30 different angles. You have dozens of witnesses. You have my daughter's tears and my son's outrage. And you still hedge your words? Deputy Chief, let me be crystal clear. This is not going to be swept under the rug with polite promises. My name is Vanessa Harris, civil rights attorney from Chicago, and I have filed lawsuits that cost departments like yours $120 million for less than what I just witnessed. If you think I will let this slide, you are deeply mistaken. The crowd roared, their voices echoing her fury, their chants growing louder, feeding the fire that no longer could be contained. Michael finally spoke, his deep voice calm but commanding, the voice of a man who had spent decades leading investigations, giving orders, and holding steady in crisis. Deputy Chief, 5 years ago I led the FBI task force that dismantled the Miami terror cell. Your city was safe because my team and I stopped what would have been a bombing in the financial district. Your own department celebrated that win in press conferences. And today, under your command, your officers handcuffed me like a criminal in front of my children because they didn't like the color of my skin at a luxury resort. If you think for 1 second that this ends with apologies and an internal memo, you are wrong. This is going to the Department of Justice. This is going to every news outlet in America. And I will personally make sure your department is held accountable. Hayes's composure cracked for a moment. The weight of the names, the credentials, the history striking him harder than the chants of the crowd. He nodded once, stiffly, the words catching in his throat. I understand. Agent Harris. Vanessa stepped in again, her finger pointed squarely at O'Connor, who now looked pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite his forced smirk. And as for this officer, remember his name? Everyone, Officer Brian O'Connor. He mocked an FBI badge. He threw a license at my husband's chest. He caged a man in steel in front of his children. And I promise you, this will be written into every filing, every press release, every headline. You wanted to humiliate us. Officer, congratulations. Your face is going to be known in every household for exactly what you did here. Phones zoomed in on O'Connor's face as the crowd jeered, some booing, others chanting his name with contempt. O'Connor! O'Connor! Hayes raised his voice, sharp, frustrated. That's enough. Everyone, Officer O'Connor, Sergeant Miller, report back to the precinct immediately. O'Connor opened his mouth to protest, but Hayes's glare silenced him. The two officers stepped back, retreating under the heat of dozens of cameras, their steps heavy, their shoulders stiff. The crowd cheered their departure, voices echoing in triumph. But Vanessa was not finished. She turned on the resort manager, Susan Langford, who had been lingering nervously at the edge of the commotion, wringing her hands, her face pale, Vanessa's eyes cut like glass. And you called these officers. You authorized this harassment. You allowed your security chief to treat us like intruders in a hotel where we paid over $8,500 for this stay. You are just as responsible, and your corporate lawyers will be hearing from me by Monday morning. Langford stammered. Ma'am, please, we are deeply sorry. We will refund your stay. But Vanessa's hand sliced the air. Refunds don't erase trauma. Refunds don't fix my children's tears. Refunds don't restore my husband's dignity. Justice will—" The crowd cheered again, some even clapping their hands together in rhythm with her words. Michael placed his arm around Jordan and Ava, pulling them close, his other hand squeezing Vanessa's shoulder with pride and gratitude. He had seen her argue in court, but seeing her defend their family in real time, with this fire, this fury, made him silently thank the heavens she was his partner in life. Hayes tried one more time to regain control. "Agent Harris, Mrs. Harris, I will personally oversee this case. There will be transparency. There will be accountability." Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her voice firm. "We'll see. Because I'm not just trusting your word. I'm trusting the evidence, the public, and the law. And believe me, the law is on our side." The crowd erupted once more, voices chanting, "Justice, justice," as phones continued to stream the confrontation across the world for the Harris family. The humiliation of the cuffs was still fresh, the sting still raw, but in that moment, standing united against arrogance and power abused, they felt the tide turning. They knew the battle had only just begun, but they also knew they were no longer alone. The crowd had become their witnesses, the cameras had become their allies, and the world was watching. By the time the Harris family left the pool deck, the story was no longer confined to Ocean Breeze Resort in Miami. It was racing across the internet at a speed no department or hotel public relations team could control. Within 2 hours, the live stream that had captured Officer O'Connor snapping handcuffs on Michael Harris's wrists had been viewed more than 4 million times, clipped, reposted, and captioned with words like outrage and shame. Guests who had recorded from different angles began uploading their footage too. And by evening, there were at least 26 separate videos circulating online, each one showing the same sequence: Michael calmly presenting his FBI badge, O'Connor tossing it back with disdain, Vanessa rising to defend him, and the metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut while 2 children looked on in terror. The hashtags Justice for Harris and hashtag Uncuff the Agent trended #1 nationwide, sparking conversations from living rooms to newsrooms. Cable networks picked up the story quickly. CNN ran the headline, "FBI Agent Wrongfully Handcuffed at Miami Resort," while Fox News and MSNBC scrambled to book guests who could comment on racial profiling, police misconduct, and the growing anger at systemic abuse of power. Interviews with witnesses were broadcast before sunset, with one tourist visibly shaking as she told reporters, "I've never seen anything so humiliating in my life. He showed them his badge, he told them his room number, and they still treated him like a criminal." By the end of the night, local news stations reported that the resort had already lost 15% of its bookings for the next month, with angry customers canceling reservations, citing safety and ethics concerns. The parent corporation's stock slid by 4.2% in early after-hours trading, wiping out nearly $200 million in market value. Meanwhile, at the Harris family's hotel suite, Vanessa was already drafting the language of a lawsuit, her laptop open, her fingers moving with relentless precision. She called one of her colleagues in Chicago. "This isn't just about us," she said into the phone, her voice steady though her children slept in the next room, still shaken. "This is about every family treated like trespassers in spaces they paid to be in. I'm filing 2 suits. $25 million against the Miami-Dade Police Department for unlawful detention of a federal agent. $25 million against Ocean Breeze Resort for negligence, discrimination, and violation of contract. We paid over $8,500 for this stay, and they repaid us with handcuffs. That number is going to echo." Michael sat nearby, silent, rubbing the red marks still circling his wrists. He had spent a career serving quietly, rarely stepping into the spotlight. But tonight, his name was on every news ticker. He thought of the times he had lectured younger agents about restraint, about calm, about avoiding escalation at all costs. And now he felt the bitter irony of having lived his own advice to the letter, only to still be caged by prejudice. He whispered more to himself than to anyone. They threw my badge back like it was nothing. Vanessa paused, looked up from her screen, and met his eyes. That badge is worth more than their arrogance. Tomorrow the world will see that. Jordan, who had refused to sleep, stepped out from the bedroom, his eyes still swollen from earlier tears. "Dad, why did they treat you like that?" he asked. His voice quiet but heavy with the first sharp edge of betrayal a child feels when innocence is broken. Michael pulled him close, his arm wrapping around his son's shoulders. "Because some people judge before they know the truth," he answered gently. "But what matters is we fight back the right way. We stand. We speak. We hold them accountable." Jordan nodded slowly, the fire of understanding flickering in his young face. Across the country, commentators debated the case. Civil rights leaders called it proof that no badge, no title, no career could shield a black man from prejudice. Former law enforcement officers expressed shame and anger at O'Connor's behavior, warning it would undermine trust across agencies. A retired federal judge told MSNBC, "When you handcuff a federal agent who presented identification, you don't just humiliate him, you humiliate the rule of law." The storm was too loud to silence. By dawn, reporters were camped outside Ocean Breeze Resort. Guests trying to check out whispered to cameras. It was chaos. The whole pool was chanting, "I've never seen police lose control like that." At the same time, the police union scrambled to defend O'Connor, releasing a statement calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding. The words backfired instantly, mocked online as hollow and tone-deaf, comment sections filled with rage. "A misunderstanding is forgetting a room key." One post read, "A misunderstanding is mixing up luggage. This was humiliation in handcuffs." Vanessa's lawsuit was filed within 48 hours. Her name stamped across national headlines. Attorney Vanessa Harris files $50 million suit after FBI husband handcuffed. The number, 50 million, seared into the public's mind, symbolic of the cost of arrogance. Ocean Breeze executives flew in from New York, offering free stays, gift cards, anything to soften the blow. But Vanessa dismissed them all. "Money in private means nothing. Justice in public means everything," she told a reporter as cameras rolled. The DOJ in Washington quietly contacted Michael, asking for a formal statement. "You've put us in a very difficult position," one senior official admitted over the phone. Michael's reply was simple. "No, they put us all in this position. I just lived it." By the end of the week, Officer O'Connor had been suspended without pay, Sergeant Miller placed under internal review, and Security Chief Alan Brooks had resigned from the resort. Deputy Chief Hayes, who had tried to contain the fire, now found himself grilled at a press conference, forced to admit. "The optics were terrible. The conduct is under full investigation," reporters shouted back. "Optics? Or racism?" His silence was answer enough. For the Harris family. The days that followed were exhausting. Interviews, calls, statements, support pouring in from strangers around the country. Ava clung to her mother constantly, still waking at night from nightmares of her father being taken away. Jordan became fiercely protective, telling classmates who teased him, "You don't understand. I saw my dad in cuffs for nothing." Michael carried the weight quietly. But Vanessa knew. She saw the way his jaw tightened when he rubbed his wrists, the way his eyes lingered on the television when commentators replayed the video for the 100th time. She leaned on him. He leaned on her. And together they built their resolve. They were no longer just a family on vacation. They were symbols in a national reckoning. And as Vanessa finished one more draft of her legal filing, her words sharpened like arrows, she whispered to herself, "This is bigger than us now. This is for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. 6 months had passed since the day Michael Harris was humiliated at the Ocean Breeze Resort, and yet the echoes of that single moment still rippled through courtrooms, boardrooms, and news broadcasts across the country. The fallout had been relentless. Officer Brian O'Connor, once arrogant and smug with his cuffs, had been fired after a disciplinary board ruled his conduct gross misconduct with willful disregard for federal authority. His name had become a cautionary tale in law enforcement circles, whispered as a reminder that no badge protects arrogance when the world is watching. Sergeant David Miller, though less aggressive, faced his own reckoning. He was suspended for failing to intervene when he knew his partner had crossed the line, and training manuals now used his hesitation as a case study for why silence is complicity. At the resort, Security Chief Alan Brooks had resigned under public pressure, his career in ruins, while General Manager Susan Langford was reassigned quietly by the corporate office, her name forever tied to one of the worst PR disasters in hospitality history, Ocean Breeze Resorts, once boasting occupancy rates above 90%, saw bookings plunge by nearly a quarter in the months after the videos went viral. Lawsuits from other former guests began to surface, emboldened by Vanessa Harris's fight, and the corporation was forced to set aside more than $75 million in legal reserves. Investors panicked, and the parent company's stock, already battered, fell another 12% in the following quarter. Wiping out close to $600 million in value, the board of directors announced a new initiative, the Equity and Hospitality Fund, pledging $10 million toward diversity training, recruitment reforms, and guest protections, but critics dismissed it as a Band-Aid on a wound that required surgery. The Department of Justice had opened a formal investigation into the Miami-Dade Police Department, citing patterns of racial profiling, unlawful detentions, and misuse of force. And Michael Harris's case was front and center in the hearings. His testimony before Congress was broadcast nationwide, his steady voice describing the humiliation of presenting his badge, the weight of his daughter's tears, and the ache in his son's question. "Why did they treat you like that, Dad?" Millions watched in silence, and when he finished, the chamber erupted in applause, rare in such a solemn place. Vanessa became the face of legal accountability, her lawsuit inspiring similar actions in other cities. She stood on courthouse steps with clients who had once been voiceless, her presence a beacon of courage. The $50 million suit she filed gained momentum. Depositions revealed troubling emails between resort staff about keeping an eye on certain types of guests, and evidence showed O'Connor had received prior complaints for discriminatory behavior. Every revelation added fuel to the fire, and every headline carried the Harris name further. For the family, life was not simple. Ava continued to wake at night, nightmares replaying the sound of handcuffs clicking around her father's wrists. Vanessa held her close, whispering, "Daddy is safe. We are safe," though she knew the scars would take time to heal. Jordan had turned his anger into determination, joining his school's civil rights club, giving speeches that surprised even his teachers with their passion. "I watched my dad get treated like a criminal," he told his classmates, "and I'll spend my life making sure that doesn't happen to anyone else." His words were clipped into videos, circulating online as proof that even the young could carry the torch of justice. Michael, though proud of his family, wrestled with his own burden. He had always seen himself as the protector, the shield, the man who faced danger so his loved ones didn't have to. That day had cracked that image, forcing him to admit that even the strongest armor could not block prejudice. Yet he turned his pain into purpose. He accepted speaking invitations at law enforcement academies, reminding recruits that authority without humility becomes tyranny. "Never forget," he told them, his voice firm, "that the person you stop, question, or cuff is a human being first. If you forget that, You don't deserve the badge." His words carried weight, not just because of his title, but because of the red marks that had once circled his wrists. Across America, the Harris story was retold again and again. It became a documentary, a college lecture case study, and even an example cited in legal briefs demanding reforms. Civil rights leaders praised Vanessa's courage. Law enforcement leaders privately admitted Michael's restraint had prevented a disaster, and ordinary families saw themselves in the Harris children, recognizing the injustice of innocence stolen. The DOJ investigation culminated in a consent decree, forcing the Miami-Dade Police Department to implement body-worn cameras in all interactions, to mandate intervention training, and to create a civilian oversight board with real authority. Activists celebrated, skeptics doubted, but everyone knew change had been forced because one family refused to stay silent. At the resort, a plaque was quietly installed in the lobby, stating, "We commit to dignity and equality for every guest." But the irony was not lost on those who knew the truth. The Harris family, meanwhile, found strength in their unity. Michael and Vanessa sat often on their back porch in Chicago, watching their children play, reflecting on how a vacation meant to heal had instead launched a movement. Michael would shake his head sometimes, still marveling. "All I wanted was a week by the pool," he'd say softly, and Vanessa, with a tired but proud smile, would answer, "And instead we got a chance to change the system." Together they knew the fight was not over, but they also knew they were no longer alone. They carried with them the voices of millions, the chants of strangers, the flood of comments from across the world saying, "We stand with you." And in that knowledge, in that solidarity, the sting of handcuffs was slowly replaced with the weight of purpose. 9 months after the day Michael Harris was humiliated in handcuffs at the Ocean Breeze Resort, the story had transformed from a moment of outrage into a national reckoning that left an indelible mark on both the Harris family and the country at large. The lawsuits Vanessa filed were settled in a historic agreement. The Miami-Dade Police Department agreed to pay $25 million and accept sweeping reforms under federal oversight, while Ocean Breeze Resorts quietly reached a $25 million settlement that included not only financial damages, but a binding commitment to fund a 10-year program called the Guest Equity Initiative, a training and monitoring system designed to prevent racial profiling in hospitality. The press hailed it as one of the largest settlements of its kind, a message to every industry that silence and apologies were no longer enough when human dignity was trampled. For Vanessa, standing on the courthouse steps with reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing, it was vindication, but also a promise. She told the crowd, her voice steady and resolute, "This was never just about my husband, or me, or even our children. This was about every family who has been told they don't belong, every child who has had to ask why their parent was treated differently. Today we made progress, but the fight is not over. We will keep pushing until equal treatment is not a dream, but a reality." Her words were carried on every evening news broadcast, and across living rooms in America people nodded, some with tears, some with anger, but all with recognition that her family's ordeal had touched something deep. Michael, though less visible in the media, became a sought-after speaker at FBI field offices and police academies. His testimony, calm and unflinching, resonated with recruits who had grown weary of lectures on ethics, but leaned forward when he told them how it felt to stand handcuffed before his children after showing his badge. "I didn't resist," he would say quietly, his voice heavy. "I did everything right, and still it happened. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. Never forget that your authority is borrowed, not owned, and it must be wielded with humility, or it will turn to poison." His words found their way into training manuals, seminars, and even congressional hearings, cited as a warning and a call to conscience. At home, life slowly began to heal. Ava, once frightened at night by dreams of her father being dragged away, found comfort in therapy sessions arranged by family friends, and over time her laughter returned. Bright and fearless, Jordan, who had carried his anger like a weight, found purpose in activism, giving speeches at school assemblies and later at youth conferences, where he told other young people, "I saw my dad in cuffs for nothing, and I will never forget it. But it showed me we can fight back, not with violence, but with truth, with law, with courage. That's the path my parents showed me." His words drew standing ovations, clips of his speeches spreading online, inspiring others to speak out. Vanessa balanced her legal career with her growing role as a national advocate. Testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee about the need for stronger protections against racial profiling, she was introduced not just as an attorney, but as the woman whose lawsuit had forced a multi-million-dollar corporation and one of the largest police departments in the country to change. She spoke with clarity and fire, reminding lawmakers, "Justice delayed is dignity denied. We cannot wait for another family to be broken in front of cameras before we act." Her remarks were replayed on Sunday morning political shows, debated, praised, and criticized, but never ignored, and through it all, Michael and Vanessa remained grounded in their family. On the anniversary of the incident, they returned quietly to Miami, not to the Ocean Breeze Resort, but to the public beach nearby. The sun was setting, the waves rolling in soft and steady, and they stood together as a family. Jordan taller now, Ava holding her mother's hand, Michael's arm wrapped around his wife. There were no cameras, no reporters, just the four of them, remembering and reclaiming the space. Michael looked at his children and said softly, "That day changed us, but it did not break us. We are stronger because we stood together." Vanessa nodded, her eyes glistening, her voice firm even in the quiet. "And because we didn't stay silent." The legacy of their fight spread further than they ever expected. Universities used the Harris case as a teaching module in law and sociology courses. Churches preached about it as a parable of endurance and justice. Documentaries told the story in powerful detail, and even lawmakers cited it as a reason to push forward with reform bills. Hashtags that once burned in the heat of outrage now lived on as rallying cries for broader change. And yet for the Harris family, the truest victory was found not in headlines or settlements, but in the resilience of their children, the strength of their marriage, and the knowledge that they had turned humiliation into history. As they left the beach that evening, Jordan carrying a basketball under his arm, Ava holding a small seashell she insisted on keeping, Michael took one last look at the horizon. He breathed deeply, letting the salty air fill his lungs, and for the first time in a long time, he felt not the sting of handcuffs, but the steady weight of purpose. Their story was not just a personal one anymore. It was part of a larger movement, a reminder that dignity is not given by authority. It is claimed by courage. And with that, the Harris family walked forward together, not broken, not defeated, but stronger, ready to keep fighting for a world where no father, no mother, no child would ever have to ask again, "Why are we treated like we don't belong?" Thank you for watching. Tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories, and hit like to help share this message of justice.